Welcome to the Jill on Money Show. It's Sunday, October 6th, and this is the program that tries to take the mystery out of your financial life. We try to give you some entertaining insights on your money, on your life, and today we are airing the second part of an interview that I conducted with Bill McBride. He is a housing analyst. He's based on the West Coast, and the first part of our interview, which we aired yesterday, it was sort of a background on nominal house prices, where prices are. And this was done in front of a live audience at the Future Proof Conference in Huntington Beach, California. And I just want to be clear that sometimes there's charts that I'm referring to, and you're not going to see those charts. But if you have a question about anything we discuss in this interview or in yesterday's interview, you can always contact us. Just go to JillOnMoney.com. Don't forget to let us know if you want to come on the air. Sign up for the free weekly newsletter. And by the way, don't forget to check out our YouTube show. It's called Jill on Money, powered by the Compound. Okay, so here we go. Part 2 of our interview with Bill McBride of the Calculated Risk blog. So when you look at where we are today, there have been some more, I think that some of the lending standards have loosened a tiny bit because a lot of people will not get that standard 20% down to get the best rate. Is that a mistake for if people are guiding their clients and you've got a young client and the client's like, well, I only have 8% down, or I can put 5% down and get an FHA loan. Is there danger in that?
You know, I think it depends on the client. If the client can really afford the house, I don't see anything wrong with an FHA loan. It's true that FHA has a lot more delinquencies than other loans. That's just because they have looser standards. So some of those people probably shouldn't be buying. That's the answer.
Do you think that we should be shifting this 20% down now that prices are up about 50%? Should we rethink that?
You can get a loan with less than 20% down.
No, but do you know what I'm saying? Like as a mantra that we've grown up with.
Yeah, I don't think we need to stick with that. If you want to get the best rate, you put 20% down. You know, I think it would really depend on the situation. I'm not a stickler for 20% down at all.
That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I mean, especially living through the crisis.
Yeah.
I became more interested in it like as like a safe harbor for people, like just in case. Maybe I should be rethinking that.
Well, if let's say you take out a 7-year ARM and you can afford the payment, if you can get in with 10% down, I mean, there's no real problem because it can't adjust for 7 years.
Right.
So that's totally different than what happened in 2004, 2005, 2006.
Yeah, I mean, because that was really like lending to anyone with no money down.
Yeah, no money down, you get cash out.
I know, right?
You buy with cash out.
Oh, by the way, what's going on with our equity right now? The ATM is closed? Is that what's happening?
For the most part, yeah. We used to joke that when people withdrew money out of their house, that was the home ATM. For the most part, it's barely open. We probably going to see a little bit of pickup in cash out refis with lower mortgage rates because of the people that bought with 7% mortgage rates. They're probably going to refi, and a lot of times they'll take $20,000, $30,000 out or something.
If there's equity.
Yeah. Well, those people probably. Well, I don't know.
I don't know. Like in the last year.
Yeah, 7%. Yeah, they might not have much equity.
It's shocking, but about just under 60% of all outstanding mortgages are under 4%. Under 4%. And where are we now? 6.2? A bit-ish?
Yeah.
Okay.
Somewhere.
And so what is the rate at which you think we're going to start to see more activity? Someone who's got a 3% note who says, okay, I had 3 kids in the last 5 years. I need to move and I got to bite the bullet. Is there a round number? Is it a 5%? Is it just going below 6%? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't think there's any perfect number. It's hard to go from 3% to 6%. And let's say you're out and you wanted to get 1 extra bedroom, it's hard to make it financial sense. So, what does happen over time is those people's life needs will outweigh the financial difference. So if we get down into the 5s and time passes, somebody might be willing to give up their 3% loan. Of course, as Jill and I were talking, some of those people will, if they're doing okay, will buy a new house and keep the old one and rent it. So it might not increase the supply as much as we'd like.
Right. And I think that like when you're when you're talking to somebody who's considering moving up, I think that the messaging is really, that 3% loan, don't wait around for that. That's not coming back. Because Bill and I were also talking, like, if we're at 3% mortgages anytime soon, we're in a horrible recession. Bad stuff is happening. Where do you think we're going to be at the end of next year in the 30-year fixed? End of next year.
Somewhere in the probably high fives.
And so you think it'll take until the end of 26 to get to 5?
I don't know. I don't know when we're going to get back to 5. 5% is possible without a crisis. The one of the weird things is in 2020 we had really low interest rates, but most of the people that would be home buyers still had their jobs. And so if we get into a situation where we're back well under 5%, that means we are in a crisis. And it'd probably be very different than the pandemic crisis.
What's like the long-term average going back to, let's say, 1976 or 7? If you think about a mortgage interest rate, if the average of Fed funds is 3, what was the average for?
Well, I think probably the median's in that 5 to 6% range.
So 5 to 6 would be like normal. Bill said something fascinating to me. He said, time passing is a very good thing. In the same way that time passing will sort of get us a little bit beyond this inflationary period, that timing passing from that sub 3% or 4% mortgage, which was very distinct and crazy, frankly. So when you think about how you look at the housing market, which, for a lot of people, especially early on, it's their biggest asset, right? That you're not waiting to perfectly time the market. So I want to also talk a little bit about rents. Can you explain why we use such bad data in the CPI report for rents?
It's not bad data.
Oh, okay, I'm just kidding.
No.
It's not exact.
We could go on for hours on this, but the rents took a big surge in 2021, which was kind of surprising because in 2021 house prices were really taking off because of all the demand, and so what that meant was something unusual was happening. Is what we were getting is a lot of household formation without minimal immigration. And in 2020 there was almost no net migration into the U.S. Why? Because of the pandemic. So why were rents taking off? Well, now we know that a lot of it was people splitting up. Roommates splitting up, people getting divorced, somebody taking an apartment.
I spent a lot of time with you during the pandemic, and I've had enough. Kind of like that.
Yeah, and people were working from home. Yeah. You imagine 2 roommates. Hey, everything's great. Now we see each other all day. It gets pretty old. So we had this big surge in rents, which also, by the way, led to a big surge in apartment starts, because naturally people are going to say, hey, rents are going way up. Let's build apartments. But in the last year and a half or 2 years, asking rents have been kind of flat. This is for multifamily. It's still going up for single-family houses. Naturally, apartment starts have dropped way off too. But the question she asked was, well, how come that isn't showing up in the CPI? And it is showing up, but slowly. They're not doing asking rents. They do a survey of people who rent houses, and so since rents are usually only increased once a year, it takes a whole year to catch up to all those rents. So, if your rent just came up today, you might still see an increase, whereas asking rents might be down. And by the way, landlords tend to try to always increase the rents. So.
You're kidding?
Yeah.
That happens?
Yeah, depending on supply and demand, but they also know that tenants don't like to move. So yeah. So tenants kind of get the raw end of that one.
As always. All right, don't you hate when people throw your own words back at you? So let me do that with
Okay, sure.
So, Bill just recently wrote that we've had 12 months of year-over-year declines in apartment rents. I think you wrote that. The median rent is down $13 a month, 0.7%, since the peak of August of 2022. But rents are still 20% higher than they were in 2019. So rents actually are sort of moved with the inflation rate.
Yeah,
right?
and the CPI measure of rents, which is primarily owner equivalent rent, is just catching up to that.
because they say, well, how do we account for people who own a house if you've got a 3% mortgage? Not like you're. So they call people up, and the 6 people who answer say, they say, well, what would your house rent for in this marketplace? How do they know that? That's nonsense, isn't it? Don't we have better ways to measure this?
People are trying. There are people who are kind of trying to substitute asking rents, because we do have some good measures of that, into the CPI. And it is really showing that the overall inflation rate is probably lower than what we're hearing.
If prices are up by more than 50% in the last 5 years, but rents are only up 20%, why shouldn't I just keep renting until those numbers come back into sync?
Good question.
I mean, really?
It really depends on your situation.
Oh, my God.
I would much rather be a homeowner than a renter.
Why?
If I bought the right house.
Why? It's such a pain in the ass.
Because you get to control it's all under your control.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, I would much rather, and you're not gonna, you don't have to move if you don't want to. If the landlord does something, I'd much rather be a homeowner than a renter.
Okay.
If the cost was the same, I would definitely be a homeowner.
You just got back from Africa, and
Yes.
you love that trip. And there's the big 5 of Africa, right? Lion, I had to look this up. I couldn't remember buffalo. Lion, leopard, rhino, elephant, buffalo. What's the big 5 of economic data that everybody who is in this business needs to understand? What are the biggest, 5 most important economic data points that these folks should know about?
I would always say GDP, unemployment, or employment, unemployment. Those would be the top 2. Along with, I would go with home sales, especially new home sales, and housing starts. That's 4. And recently, I would go with inflation.
But not always?
No, most of the time, I wouldn't put that as a top 5.
You're not a huge fan of confidence as a indicator.
No, I wouldn't. That wouldn't get into the top 5 at all. So I would have to think what would be.
What about retail sales, which we just got today? How important is that?
That's a key number.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd put it in top 5. I mean, the top 4 I can come up with off the top of my head. I could say employment and unemployment, and that would give me 2.
No, you're not allowed.
Oh, okay.
This is how I did it. I said jobs is 1. So
Okay, jobs is definitely 1.
I said jobs, GDP, housing, inflation, retail sales. Those were my 5. Because I didn't let you do the cheat of new home sales and existing home sales. Which is a cheat.
I didn't do that. I said new home sales and housing starts.
Okay. So I'm wondering, as you look ahead, what are the pressure points that you see for the housing market? What should people be aware of that is, worth monitoring?
Well, the first thing everybody looks at is mortgage rates.
Yeah.
So I'd watch supply. Especially in your local areas. If you're, it's funny because when people find out what I do, the first question I always get asked is, well, what's going to happen with house prices? Nobody can answer that. Nobody has a perfect crystal ball. Now, in 2005, I was saying, house prices might fall 40% in some areas, and people thought I was nuts. This year, I was comparing with another analyst. My forecast was house prices would go up 3 to 4% this year. I think his was a little lower than that. If you ask me what's going to happen with house prices over a longer period of time, you never really know. The history of housing and land and real estate is booms and busts. That goes back long before the Case-Shiller Index ever existed. So you hear about the South Seas land bust. This is something that's gone on forever, and it will continue. There have been times in my life when I've walked into an open house. I remember in 1996 in California, and I thought, darn, this is cheap. And so if you ever have that happen to you, that's probably a good time to buy.
And I'm going to give you one last question just on we heard about the surge of housing and prices in Florida and South Texas. And are the ones that went up the most ripe to see some moderation or even declines?
Well, there's certain areas that yes, Austin, Texas was a good example. Parts of Idaho where people fled during the pandemic, and now they're selling those homes, and those went up a lot. South Texas and Florida have particular issues, and especially Florida, because of climate change is really causing. The first impact of climate change isn't so much the flooding and the damage from the storms. It's the the insurance companies raising their homeowners insurance because they're afraid of the damage, and that's really what we're seeing today. So other areas that went up a lot, I don't see them dropping dramatically.
If you've got a question that these interviews have brought up, if you've got a question about your own home, about where interest rates are going, about whether or not to refinance, whether you can buy, whether you should sell, let us know. Just go to the website, JillOnMoney.com, click the Contact Us button, write us that note, and if you want to join us on the air live, which I highly recommend, just check the box and Mark will do everything else. By the way, if you want to take a deeper dive into the real estate world, you've got to be a member of Jill on Money Live. That is where you can find our most recent webinar, which we did on real estate. So $35 for the next 12 months, but you can also watch the most recent webinar where we had a realtor and a mortgage broker, and Mark and I talked a lot about what was going on in the real estate market. So you may want to check that out. You can subscribe to us, as always, on the Odyssey app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Try to do something nice for someone else today. Change your work, change your wealth, change your life. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.